There's 2.5 weeks to go, but is the general election already in the bag for Labour? Tory Defence Secretary Grant Shapps seemed to give up this morning when he said it's unlikely the Conservatives will win. And will Scotland's humiliating, abject performance against Germany in the Euros have any impact on the election in Scotland? I'm Paul Hutcheon of the Daily Record, and joining me on the podcast today are Borland and Andrew Quinn. This is Planet Holyrood.
It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
So it seems like Grant Shapps, the Tory Defence Secretary, is the bearer of bad news for his own colleagues and for Tory voters. You'll remember that he was the guy that started the talk about avoiding a Labour supermajority last week, which obviously presumes that Labour are going to win big. Now he's kind of up in the ante. This was his quote this morning. He said, "It's possible to win the election. Do I accept it's not the most likely outcome? Yes, I accept that. I'm a realist." So again, Ben, it doesn't really sound like the Tories have got self-belief in this election. It sounds like they've already given up the ghost.
I'm sure that's not the official stance of the Tories. But I mean, Grant Shapps, like the rest of us, can read the polls and will not only see what the polls are saying today, but the direction of travel. It just, I think, I don't think I'm being giving anyone any major insight when it says it looks extremely likely, almost certain that Labour are going to get a majority or at least get the most MPs at the election. Maybe Grant Shapps has got, a more cunning strategy in mind. Maybe he's trying to scare some of the Tory voters who have gone over to Reform back to Labour by just spelling out that, look, we're heading for a Starmer government here. Has Grant Shapps got that kind of strategy? Would that even work? I don't know. Or has he just kind of, in an off-guarded moment, said what I'm sure everyone is thinking down there, and he's just allowed it to slip out while he's being interviewed Monday morning. Might have had a few pints down the Conservative club last night watching the football. Who knows? I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree with him. It's just it's bad electoral strategy to admit defeat, and I'm sure there will be sending people out to sort of row back on that message and to talk it up again, talk up the chances. But I don't think Grant Shapps has let anything slip. I'm certain that within Conservative HQ and Downing Street, that's the view that they're taking.
It doesn't, Andrew, seem like the Tories have a strategy of even trying to deny Labour a majority of any sort. It seems to be about reducing a massive majority, because the polls are showing that Labour in line for 200 plus. They seem to be wanting maybe to reduce that to about 120 or 100 rather than getting a hung parliament.
Yeah, that's probably the case. But I mean, Sunak has still been saying that he can win, which is crazy. I mean, he did say yesterday afternoon at about 1 o'clock that, yeah, of course we can still win. So it's kind of undermined him, Shapps, coming out and saying that he doesn't expect it. But yeah, I mean, the Tories will be completely reserved to not winning. I mean, a lot of them were before the election was called. Maybe they had a bit of an outside hope that in the first couple of weeks in the debates they could try and do something, because obviously they think Labour don't have enough policies or anything like that, and they say Labour don't have a plan. So they kind of hoped they could win back there. But I mean, we're 3 weeks into the campaign now. The Tories haven't gained any ground. In fact, it actually looks worse for them because of Reform. So yeah, I think Ben's probably right that yeah, they're basically trying to stave off reform at the moment and preserve themselves rather than actually beating Labour, because there's almost nothing they can do that would beat Labour. Like, they've got a terrible record over the last 14 years. I don't think there's many folk who aren't super wealthy who feel better off, who feel like our public services are better. So yeah, they're trying everything they can. I mean, now they've been saying they're going to up the ante with personal attacks against Starmer as well. I don't think that's going to go well, though. They're the party in government, and it looks pretty desperate, and it looks like they're not fit to govern when they're hitting out with all these ploys. So
I know I've got a family member who's Tory-minded, and he described Starmer as a solid citizen. Don't think I'm going to be voting for Labour, but thinks that Starmer's a pretty decent individual.
yeah.
I just wonder if personal attacks on him as the head of the prosecution service are really going to land.
Well,
or
yeah.
is desperate.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of Tory-minded folk would probably quite admire Starmer in a way. Like, he was the first person in his family to go to university. He went to grammar school that then became a private school when he was there. But he's kind of a sign of social mobility. Very respectable job. Like, he's probably had the most high-profile job that if he becomes Prime Minister, that any Prime Minister's ever had. And quite an impressive career. So it's kind of a thing that a lot of, middle-of-the-road Tories would really respect. But they're kind of going for a culture war thing when they attack Starmer, trying to say that, like, his record as a lawyer, he defended folk who were facing the death penalty and stuff like that. They're going to try and go on that. But again, the damage, it's not really to do with characters anymore. It's to do with the state of the country. And I think the public's made its mind up, and Labour are going to win by some distance.
Then I'm trying to think of what could happen between now and Poland Day that could effectively be the turning point for the Tories. But I'm struggling to see anything on the diary, on the schedules that fits the bill. I mean, you've got this BBC Question Time debate, unless Starmer does really badly. But even then, I mean, I'm looking at the viewing figures for these leaders' events, and they're not really box office anymore, are they? It's not 2010 Clegg, Brown and Cameron. They seem to be quite low rent affairs.
I mean, really, 2010, that was the first time we'd had them, and they really seemed to have an impact. I think the two referendums, Scottish independence and Brexit referendum debates were good, but largely, by and large, general election debates aren't seen as huge talkers. I mean, we might get quite excited in the media, but I don't think the average man or woman in the street really tunes in any great numbers, and especially not when the football's on. I mean, you're gonna struggle to get much of an audience when, even if you're up against two sort of medium ranking teams and not one of the blockbuster games. You're still going to struggle to get an audience for these debates now in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to compare the viewing figures on Thursday to whatever football matches are on Thursday, even if it's not Scotland and England. If it's it's England is Thursday, although it's 5 p.m. It's quite an early one. Yeah, so it'll probably be finished by the time Question Time
starts. It'll be finished, but then most of England will have been in the pub, or they're not really paying attention to political debate. I mean, I suppose this is yet another example of how much thought did Rishi Sunak really put into this snap decision to go to the country during, and when the second half of that, or the final third of the campaign is during the Euros, and there'll be, I think there's a match on polling day, so it's it's another example of that, perhaps the lack of planning, and was it just a snap decision to try and catch reform out, because that's backfired now as well. I mean, one thing, here's a hypothetical thing that could change. What if Sunak goes and the Tories do a deal with Farage and say, look, let's merge. We've got the both of us sitting around 20%, Labour are way out ahead on 40%. If we can combine our forces, suddenly we've got another election again. I mean, is that? No, it's kind of a
I mean, I think.
Work.
I mean, obviously, we had the Reform Manifesto launched today. I can only imagine that is going to strengthen Farage's hand in terms of the key voters that he's targeting from the Conservatives. I think the difference between this election and 2019 is that there was an interest for Farage. He benefited from pulling out of the seats that the Tories held because he wanted to get Brexit done. So that he benefited from helping Boris Johnson in that election. This time around, the incentives are completely different. The better he does, and the more seats the Tories lose, the more leverage he has after the election, because he's going to be in the House of Commons in Clacton.
Well, I see today he said he's going to be Prime Minister in 2029.
Yeah.
Which, who knows? Strange.
I mean, I can see a realignment after July 4th. Maybe Farage being let in. If he gets in the final two of any leadership contest, i.e. he's allowed in front of the Tory members, you could end up winning it, and then he turns the Tories into a sort of Trumpian-style culture war party, and then you get maybe traditional Tories who are socially liberal, economically conservative, moving to the Lib Dems. I think you would see a total realignment of the right and the centre right in this country. Which would be fascinating for the election after the one that we're getting next month.
It does. I think it does present a risk for Labour, though, as well, because a real thing that feeds the far right is poverty and public services not working. Obviously, a lot of folk are concerned about immigration, but you see a lot of the folk who vote for reform are in places that have been left behind in post-industrial towns. So if Labour win the election, which we think will happen, but if they don't deliver enough for these areas and Farage has a bigger platform, he'll really be hoping that he can tap into that disillusionment and become proper contenders. I mean, it sounds crazy to say that they could be proper contenders reform.
No, absolutely.
I mean, if Trump can win in America, why could Farage-led Conservative Party not win across the United Kingdom?
No, absolutely. I mean, just to pick up on what Andrew said, that I don't think it's fair to say that I wouldn't describe Reform as the far right. That they're certainly right of centre, but they're not.
How about right wing?
Right wing. Okay, yes, but the far right, the BNP, that kind of. But no, you're absolutely right that they could become a mainstream fixture. I mean, maybe it is time for a shake-up of the way British politics works. I must admit, I'm really interested in the relaunch of the SDP, the Social Democratic Party, that Rod Liddell's been talking up, and that they're kind
Rod Liddell.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
And so they're sort of socially left but economically right, which I think that I mean maybe the one thing that stops all this happening is the fact that Westminster's still got first past the post, so you don't get smaller parties, you don't get you've really got the choice of the big two or the Lib Dems and in the SNP or in Scotland. And the Welsh Plaid Cymru in Wales. So you don't really have, it's true to say most of the country, a vote for reform is just a wasted vote because they're not going to win in more than a handful of seats.
Yeah.
Ben, what do you make of this? Say there is this realignment and Farage takes over the Conservative Party. Do you think that revives the old idea of the Scottish Tories going it alone? Because they would look at that with horror, particularly in the run-up to the the Holyrood 2026 election. They don't want the UK party becoming a vehicle for English nationalism.
No, I think it probably does. I'm not sure that's ever been completely off the table. And I don't know about you guys. I kind of feel like these days the Scottish Conservatives are all, they've quietly gone about sort of moving themselves away from the UK party. Some of their policies are very different. They're certainly to the left of the UK party. They back free prescriptions. They back free tuition now, or certainly they'd want a review of it. But they're certainly not entirely aligned with the UK Conservatives already. I guess. I mean, the one thing you could say is, do they just relaunch as a union party? I think in a way it's getting a good name for them. Unionist is just such a northern. It's got such a hangover from the days of the Troubles that anyone really likes being called a unionist. As much as no nationalist likes being called a nationalist. It's
yeah. How about you, Andrew? The Tories that you speak to, the Scottish Tories, do you think they would be instinctively against cutting the cord, and that they have a sort of attachment to the UK party?
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because if they did cut the cord, then that's not a very kind of unionist thing to do, is it? Really, to break off from the UK party. But there are kind of different values in a way, and they might see reform or a further right Conservative party comes forward, Farage at the front of a Conservative party, then they might see it as the only means of really fighting the SNP, because if Farage does pretty well, that'll benefit the SNP when basically the independence support in Scotland will go up, because people don't want to be associated with that. Some people don't want to be associated with that in Scotland. So they might view it then as the only means of having a unionism that's perhaps a bit less, right wing or whatever. It's quite hard to tell. Obviously, if we're going to have a leadership contest for the Scottish Tories, and if Murdo Fraser goes for it again, he proposed breaking off the Scottish Tories from the UK party before. It'll be interesting to see what he does if he does go for it. I'm not sure how popular he is within the MSP group, but that would be interesting. He would obviously be inclined towards doing it, but I think, was it 2011 when he
Annabelle Goldie stood down.
And he really would have. He probably, if he hadn't done that, I take it he probably would have won, because
he could have kept his mouth shut, won the contest, and then tried to do it. That would have been a smarter thing. But
because
to be honest, for his own good.
Yeah, because he was much higher profile than Ruth Davidson, obviously. So it's obvious among the members, there's perhaps not as much appetite for that. But if the UK Conservative Party moves further right, and I feel like it's already gone right since David Cameron days, then I would think it's a possibility.
Let's move on from independence for the Scottish Tories to independence for Scotland. Andrew, obviously the Scotland-Germany game was a bloody nightmare. I've got no confidence we're going to beat Switzerland either. And I don't think we're going to beat Hungary as well. But in terms of the link between football and politics, do you think like a national humiliation like that harms the SNP in any way? And conversely, does the Scotland football team doing well benefit the nationalists?
Yeah, I mean, it might harm us a wee bit, because I don't know about you, but I was pretty embarrassed to be Scottish on Friday night after that game. It was pretty awful. I mean, I think, so some folk it might have an impact. I think particularly if you do well, you do feel very proud to be from your country. You feel united with folk around you, and I guess the SNP would be hoping to foster that feeling and to use it. But I mean, there's lots of folk, like obviously Douglas Ross is a big Scotland fan still. He's an assistant referee, and so is Ian Murray. He's a big football fan as well. So it's not really fair to give the SNP all the Scotland supporters.
I mean, the reason I asked, Ben, is that, of course, there was always the argument in the 70s that the trauma in Argentina, where, we convinced ourselves we were going to win the World Cup, but we were humiliated at that tournament as well, that sort of led to the failed devolution referendum. And so, I mean, do you think, is there a link between Scotland doing well at football or doing badly in political outcomes in elections?
I don't know. I mean, the SNP clearly think there are votes to be had among the Tartan Army because the sort of relentless push to get ministers at games, which just baffles me why we're paying for Mary Todd to be in Cologne on Wednesday or Angus Robertson to be in Stuttgart on Sunday. I think that there is something to be said between the sort of. I think the difficulty is you'd be looking at a sense of sort of national optimism and a renewed sense of look, things are looking up. In which case, would that translate into a vote for a party that's been in power for 17 years? Because if Scotland were to stage a revival, and I hope they do, and qualify for the next phase, then you've got this, look, we're on the up after all these years in the doldrums, we're going in the right direction. I don't think that helps a party that's been in power. So arguably, it would be more of a vote for Scottish Labour. It'd be like, the country's looking up. It's time for a change. Let's get a new government in at Westminster. Let's get some new MPs in across the central belt. I don't know. I mean, it's at the risk of being a stereotypical Englishman. I'm going to mention a certain year, 1966, and it's
what happened then.
Like you said about 78. It's often said that helped Labour win an election. And then 1970, when England crashed out, that then Labour lost and the Ted Heath Tories got back in. So I don't know. It's not a new thing to link football tournaments and the fortunes of political parties. I wonder if, though, it's a bit of hindsight applied to the fact that elections tend to come around every 4 years and football tournaments come around every 4 years. I don't know. I'm sure when the dust has settled on both events, you'll be able to go, oh, that happened because, but I don't know. I don't know if we should set too much store by it. But anyway,
one thing I can say categorically is that if there's a voter watching the football in their living room, they've opened a couple of drinks, and then some individual from a political party chaps their door and is trying to canvass them when the football's on, that's not going to go down well. So it's another example, I think, where this election, the football is probably going to get in the way of the election. It's going to stop the Tories getting their message out.
I think it definitely is. I mean, I actually can't believe they went for it because they're so far behind in the polls. I could get it if they were ahead in the polls and they're like, look, we want an election where actually there's not that much discussion, where we can just trundle on and win. But to have it now when they're the ones who have to win voters back, and actually they're not even getting the opportunity really to do that because all the debates have happened really early on because of the TV scheduling. So, yeah, but it was a terrible, terrible decision. I guess he's just hoping that England are still in the tournament and that fans are really optimistic and that they'll be so optimistic that they'll vote for the Conservatives. But as Ben said, I think they would be optimistic and they'd be like, oh, yeah, we're optimistic as well. We're going to have a change in government.
The same applies for the Tories. 14 years in power. It's that national optimism translates into let's try something different. I think.
I mean, Keir Starmer would definitely love it if England win the Euros and he's just become Prime Minister and he gets to invite the team to Downing Street, that's a pretty good photo opportunity.
Well, again, it's like, I mean, it's another one of these English football truisms that England only win tournaments under Labour governments. Tottenham Hotspur only win the cup when the year ends in one. So, it's
the best endorsement Starmer could get is from Gareth Southgate, just a tweet, vote Labour. I mean, that would be it. Game over, I think. All right, I think I'll have to wrap things up now. Thanks very much again to Andrew and to Ben for joining me today. Planet Holyrood is available every weekday during the election campaign. You can listen to this episode and previous episodes on Spotify, or you can watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. So thanks again.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.